So, good afternoon, wherever you are watching this. Joining me today, two guests live via Zoom from England. We have Ben Mayne, a historian friend of mine who was on my June the 6th show. Ben's been the fixer for this show here. And our special guest, our main guest, is a Normandy veteran, Mr. Mervyn Kersh, who was landed on Gold Beach a couple of days after D-Day. He's going to tell us about his experiences in Normandy. So, welcome to the show, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me.
Afternoon. So
it's with the 76th anniversary of D-Day having passed us a few days ago. Really, it's a rare opportunity to speak to someone who was part of the invasion, and these opportunities are getting less and less these days. So Mervyn was, as I just said in the introduction, there on Gold Beach. So tell us about when did you join up the British Army? Were you conscripted? Did you volunteer? To start at the beginning, what did the brown envelope come through your door one day?
No, I waited to be. We had to register 17 and a half, and then wait to be called up at 18. I was called up at 18 and a half. It took them 2 months to get round to me. But then after initial training with the Black Spot up in Scotland, I left London in blazing hot sun in June 17th, almost an anniversary, and then went on to Scotland and came out and fixed snow, deep snow. I did most of the training outdoors. I did the initial 6-week training, then I was told I was going into the ordnance school, which I've never heard of. I thought I was going into the ordnance section of the Royal Engineers, as I liked map drawing. Anyway, I ended up there, and I did more training, all for the future second front. I was sent from Yorkshire to Lancashire, to where we started a new company called the 17th Advanced Ordnance Depot. It was being formed there, but I got there 2 weeks too early. I wasn't quite 19 yet, so they sent me back to Yorkshire with notices on all the stations saying, is your journey really necessary? But anyway, so I wasted 2 weeks, but I didn't wait. I enjoyed them actually. Then went back again, and we did more training and organising ourselves, and moved to Shropshire, and then finally to the south of England, Billinghurst. And that was immediately sealed off. That was in May 1944. It was sealed off, and we were part of the area that all troops intended for the second front were sealed off. The only means of communication were either the telephone or by post, and the telephone was cut, so we couldn't talk on that. And all letters were censored, so we couldn't write much about that. We were given all sorts of things to be ready, cooking, a little cooking, a stove, and a disc with matches that could burn, sulfur disc, I think it was, or something. So you could do your own cooking. You were given a large bar of chocolate, white chocolate, so thick you couldn't bite it. All you could do is lick it, and that made it very messy. That was our emergency thing once we got to the other side, because there'd be no food supplies. We were given some French money, French invasion occupation money, to use there to buy food. But of course, you couldn't do it first. Then I did eventually buy milk and eggs, which I lived on. Also spent the time learning French.
All right.
But we were given other things. I was given the Order of Battle, or Order of the Mast, I think it was called. I was told where I was going to land, where the unit was going to land, not really, where the unit was going to land, and when, relative to D-Day, whenever that was going to be. So you only knew it relatively to other units, not specifically. Anyway, then there was a recce group, a recce party of 10 from our vehicle company. They went, as soon as they left us, we knew it was D-Day, and we were following a couple of days later. we followed the day later as it happened, went to Gospels, very moving going to Gospels in a long convoy. People were lining the streets and waving and sending blessings, and very, very moving indeed. Some were silent. And we got to Gospel, we went down a back street, living in our lorries or under them. It was supposed to be for 2 days, but the first day we arrived, I was arrested for not eating the meat. It was meat and veg, and a dessert, which is all I had. And I changed my meat for peaches. I got more peaches. But they had a new officer at the last minute. Previous one hadn't been arrested for losing top secret documents. He went into the cafe on his way back from London with them. Left his bike, the pannier and the secret documents outside. But he came out after his lunch. There was no bike. So he was arrested. So we got a new officer, and he noticed or was told that I wasn't eating the meat. So he had me arrested, and I came before him and spent an hour telling him that I don't eat meat, and I had every intention of wanting to go across to join in the second front, not trying to avoid it. Anyway, it took an hour, and I finally convinced him. So I never saw him again, but what happened to him. But then, I was at Gospel, sitting there, I think it was the second day, our Colonel Gore, who led the recce company, came into the street and called us all together and said that he had led them. They hadn't got across the channel, they'd been torpedoed. The others had all been killed. He was the only survivor. He got thrown into the sea, picked up by a helicopter and brought back to us, and he wanted replacements. His family wanted volunteers instead of being told to go. So I didn't go with my unit, I went ahead of my unit. I was one of the volunteers. Went ahead of the unit, so I was just pushed on the LSC, landing tank, in a vehicle with a driver. So I didn't know who I was with. I was with strangers all the time. I think it was the 50 Division.
Mm-hmm.
And I've just pushed on, so I never knew exactly what beach I landed on. Because I wasn't with my unit. We tried to trace it with my unit, but I wasn't with them. I was ahead of them. We got out. Actually, the vehicle rolled out in shallow water. That was very nice. So we were waterproof, so it didn't get wet. And we went up a ramp to the top of the cliff where we were met by women, old men and children, waving flags and giving us flowers and offering us wine and kisses, blowing kisses. Took the kisses, but didn't take the wine. I thought it might be poisoned. Anyway, there was only a few minutes, and then we started being shot at. It wasn't quite so nice as the flowers.
All right.
The police told us, keep going, there's people behind you, make room. So we drove off. I found a lovely chateau, which was, I don't know how long it was, it took me, but it was a lovely chateau. I've never found it since, I don't know which one it was. It had on it, headquarters, 21st Panzer Division. And I never found which chateau it was. I've tried from Germany, I've tried from Britain, I've tried from France, but to find out where we were. I took charge of that, but the engineers had to go through to deal with all the food traps that were in the toilet, in the piano stool, artificial books, when you open them, they were exploded. It didn't blow you up, but it could blow your fingers off because you're out of action.
Yeah.
The idea, there were lots of those. It took a few hours, and then when they finished, just as I got inside, an infantry colonel drove up, and asked what I was doing there. I told him I commandeered it for 21st Vehicle Company. It was 17th Vehicle Company. And he said, "Is your colonel here?" I said, "He'll be here any minute, sir." And he said, "Well, I'm here now. You're a private, I'm a colonel. Git." So I had to git. I had to get moving. I had to give up. after wasting a few hours. Anyway, eventually my unit did catch up and we found somewhere less suitable, and we carried on from there.
Right, well, I'm gonna hold you there for a second. I'm gonna go backpedal and go and cover some of the stuff you said. So, when you were in England, you were moving around. You went down to the camp. Did you hear about? You said you knew you were preparing for the second front, but when you heard about the actual Operation Overlord, did you hear about it all in one go? Did you get a complete briefing about everything, or did you hear about it in stages? Did you hear first it's going to be France, then someone else come in and fill the details? I'd like to know the process of. There was a point when you knew nothing, and then suddenly you know where you're going. Was it a successive series of briefings, or was it one big briefing? And tell me about when you realized what was happening.
No, it was a few days before, but probably about a week or so before.
Right.
We didn't know when it was. We didn't know where it was going to be. We knew Gold Beach was a part of the coast, but where that coast was, we don't know. We knew we were in south of England, which is opposite the French north coast, but it could have been anywhere. This part of Calais right through Brest, the whole north coast of France. We didn't know where it was. And the same with the timing, we didn't know when it was. We knew it was D+1, D+2. I went on D+2 in the end instead of D+4. But we didn't know when D-Day was until when my recce unit went off. We knew that it was about to begin because they could go first. It wasn't until we were actually driving down to convoy down to Gosport that the local people were on the route, waving newspapers, telling us D-Day had started, holding up newspapers. That was really the first we knew about it.
So the irony being, the civilians you were passing knew more about what was going on than you actually did yourself. That's army logic, isn't it? The public find out first. But so let's go back as well to talk about the 17th Advanced Vehicle Company that you talked about. What was their designated role? How did they fit into the landings in the bigger picture? What was their precise role?
Well, the initial landing, people took their own units, took their own vehicles with them at first. The other ones they were there, we were to supply all vehicles for the whole British Army, actually.
Right.
As they went over. Normally it takes 7 soldiers, line of communication called LFC soldiers, to support 1 infantry man. And my job was to supply, my company was to supply vehicles. We had folding bicycles to the great 48-wheel tank transporters, and they were coming on afterwards. And as soon as they came, it was my job to see that they got to a giant car park, which is what I wanted the chateau for. I had huge grounds. We ended up in a field somewhere. And have them documented, and every time somebody came with a note, with an indent, as we called it, from the front line, they'd lost the tank or lost the 3-ton lorry or breakdown carrier, they were able to replace it. I was able to replace it for them and then reorder it from England. So to keep that stock list going, it was a system used by Littlewood's mail order system.
Okay.
That's the one we use. It's all hand done, no computers and those things. Every vehicle in, every vehicle out has to be listed.
And tell me,
we had thousands of vehicles.
And tell me, Mervyn, in the preparation for Overlord, from your point of view, I know you were private, you were at the bottom end of the scale, but had there been a plan within the British Army to streamline the number of different vehicles? Because the British Army, we had been using Austins and Crossleys and Albions and Fordsons and Bedfords. By the time we get to 1944, had we been trying to reduce the number of types to make it easier for supplies? Because I was reading today, when the Germans invaded Russia in Operation Barbarossa, they had 2,000 different types of vehicle. The 18th Panzer Division had 800 different types of models of vehicle within their division. So by 1944, had you seen a streamlining of the vehicles, or was it all still vehicles from all different manufacturers?
They were all different manufacturers, and with each vehicle, different manufacturers had different suppliers. Parts that broke down, they had to be supplied. Most of the vehicles had their own specialist use. There were lots of, one of the main vehicles was a Bedford 3 ton,
Yeah.
which was merely moving fruit forward. Infantry got in those, instead of marching, as in 1917, it just got the vehicles and drove forward. And then, of course, the tanks, there were all sorts of specialist vehicles. One of the brilliant ideas was various types of tanks that were used for different purposes. There was one for laying a path to get over road, wet ground and so on, so it didn't sink in. They laid it, unrolled it ahead of them and dropped it down. There was a wire cutting thing that came out of the tank and slipped the wire ahead of you without getting out the tank. That was something the Americans laughed at, so they didn't copy that. But when they landed at Utah Beach, they found barbed wire, and the only way they could deal with it was by getting out the tank and cut it with the hand cutters. And of course, they were getting shots one after the other. They didn't laugh so much then. But other things, they had bridge laying equipment, they had trucks which went round and round on the barrel sort of thing, and then slayed down on the ground in front of the tank, blew up any mines that were there before the tank reached it. That also was a marvelous idea. There were quite a few innovations, but all the other vehicles as well had their own special use. I remember that we had Jeeps. We had the Willis Jeep and we had two types of Jeeps.
Ford, Willis and the Ford, yeah.
Ford. The only difference between them, one had a hole up front and the front, had holes, two little holes in the bumper, to distinguish them, but they're exactly the same. I've not gone around with that. Actually, I wasn't a driver. I hadn't had a license, and I didn't get one in the army. But I drove more vehicles than I think anyone else in the army.
So Ben, I'm going to bring Ben in for a second because Ben's patiently sitting there being not part of it. In your work on the East Riding Yeomanry, other units, Ben, we know we'd made some efforts to streamline our armour, but the rear support, have we got anywhere near streamlining it? I mean, I'm just asking your opinion as well, Ben, because are we still just using everything?
Well, the different mates were different mates, but they were made to a specific pattern. The same vehicles were made by different people, different firms. That's why we had so many different names. It didn't really matter whether it was a Bedford or one of the other companies making it. They were made to specification. And although there were many different vehicles, many different types of vehicles, quite apart from the manufacturers.
And Ben, can you add anything to that, Ben?
Yeah, from speaking to the veterans from the East Riding Yeomanry, it's quite clear from their point of view, if their tank was knocked out, they could safely withdraw back to friendly lines. They knew that within hours they would be straight back in a tank exactly the same. They weren't having to worry about trying to retrain or something. They would be back in a identical tank and ready to go, which I think the point of streamlining and being prepared would then help the men on the ground as well, the familiarity of the equipment they're using, rather than having to try and fiddle their way finding new ways of operating the kit that they had. So yeah, we're quite streamlined and able to resupply the men quickly with, for example, the vehicle parks that Mervyn looked after himself.
Yeah, no, it's interesting
It
stuff.
was very often less than an hour because of replacement. That was the objective of keeping the vehicle parks full, supplied with full, so that any vehicle could be replaced as soon as somebody came from the front. We were only, if anything, 3 to 10 miles behind the front line, so as soon as they got back, usually they came in a vehicle themselves and one got out and asked for a new vehicle, so that they soon drove off. So it was only sometimes a half an hour they lost it. They were very quickly replaced. And that was my job and my ambition was to make sure that there was never any delay.
Well, no, because that, you know, with the fact that by D+1 and D+2, although the landings have been successful, we haven't quite penetrated inland as much as we'd like to. So space is at a premium as well. So we organizing our vehicles in the beachhead is very important because of just keeping vehicles off the road that are going to get in the way of other vehicles going on their way to the front. You know, we have to have space for ambulances to come backwards, tanks to go forwards. We have to have space for the recovery vehicles to go and pick up the vehicles. So the controlling of that was paramount. So what involvement did you have, Mervyn, with the military police and the beach masters and people like that? Are they controlling the roads?
No, the beach masters only just speeded people out from vehicles up that were coming in off the sea from England. They didn't have any control of the vehicles. My colleague went down to the beach and he was seeing to the vehicles, seeing to the, he had 200 drivers. They took over the vehicles as they landed. They came off the ship and he drive them up to where I was waiting for the vehicle park, which was, as I say, anything from 3 to 10 miles behind the front line at any time. When the front line, when we finally broke out of Normandy, which was the 20th of August, only the 21st of August, then we started moving, and we had to move it. We followed them. We followed 30 Corps mostly. We followed 30 Corps right through Belgium, through France, through Belgium to Holland, and then finally into Germany.
And that would put a different strain on the vehicles then, because in Normandy, although you were trying to keep all these vehicles on the road, you weren't covering the miles. But once we break out of Normandy, of course, we're in Belgium within about 3 weeks. So we're suddenly putting a distance on these vehicles we hadn't done before. Because I mean, I used to have a Morris C8, and then the 1944 GS truck, and it would barely do 35 miles an hour. And if a journey of more than about 20 miles for it, and it would struggle. So our vehicles were okay in World War II, but when we're having to cover hundreds of miles in them, that puts a lot of pressure because they're not meant to go very fast, and convoys, and there's always one that's going to break down. So keeping these vehicles on the road, I think, is paramount to the effort in land. You said you were only 3 or 10 miles behind the lines, but of course you were in danger. The Germans have artillery and they have aircraft. Were there any narrow escapes for you in Normandy, or do you remember when the coming under fire?
The only time I had a narrow escape that I was aware of, anyway, it was just there was a huge hole for our civilians to cover with canvas, and we were told that there were 12 German Tiger tanks about 12 miles away and heading up to us, and nothing could stop them. There was nothing. Their armour was so thick that any shells we had just bounced off. So we left our new homes and started withdrawing. We never retreated in the army, only withdraw. And we started going. But the only thing that stopped the tanks in the end was the Air Force bombing them. Each one had to bomb. The shells had no use on Friday or February. That was the whole argument, you say, the whole dispute in the war is between tanks, whether they have superior armour or not. Not so much the guns, though that all came into it, but mainly the armour. If they could build the tank, any side, to build a tank with armour, with shell-resisting armour, that was the thing.
But we Allies learned that it was not often, when we were trying to eliminate a German tank unit, it was not always advisable to try and take on the tanks. What you can do, though, is take out the soft skins, the trucks behind. I mean, when you look at the work of the Typhoons in the Normandy campaign, I think only about 4% of armoured vehicles are knocked out by Typhoons, but the Typhoons did take out the transport. They took out the German fuel Bowsers and the transport trucks and the spare parts trucks. So did you know your vehicles were going to be possibly a target of the German Luftwaffe? Because again, the Germans, if they can take out the soft skins behind the main advance, they're taking out the supply lines, aren't they? So were you briefed on that? Were you aware that taking out transport would be a possible German tactic?
We were aware that it was possible, but actually I was never attacked. Where I was never attacked by shells. The Air Force, the German Air Force, was hardly seen. After the first couple of days, which only appeared at night, we didn't see them in the daytime, and by night, of course, we were camouflaged, so they didn't have a chance. What they were trying to reach were the beaches.
Yeah.
So they were driven too far away. They had both what Air Force there was of the Germans and the artillery was aiming a lot at the beaches to stop more stuff coming on. But it didn't have that effect. It wasn't strong enough. The Germans weren't all that good.
Well, no, I mean, the fact we won, I think, is proof of that. So when you talked earlier about the French civilians near Gold Beach coming out with wine, and what other interactions did you have with the locals over the next few weeks? Were relations good with them? Did you have much to do with them, or did they keep themselves to themselves?
No, they were very, very friendly. While we were waiting to break out, because it was static, and I used to spend with another boy, had schoolboy friends, to spend all the time at the farm, to spend the whole evening if we were off duty, talking French. The French were very, very friendly with us. We didn't come across any who were hostile, perhaps they didn't dare to, but we didn't come across any who were hostile. And I think the French were really taking care of their own, who were pro-German.
Yeah.
We were told before we left England to beware of the French girls, who might be very friendly, because we were told they might have been just as friendly with the Germans before. We were given a talk on VG, the nearest diseases. Had you as well, which was useful to the questions that were asked. We never had occasion to ask such questions.
And had you been given any briefing before the invasion about how to deal with the civilians? I mean, some American units were told to have absolutely nothing to do with the civilians. Were you given any instructions, or were you just, I know you said you had the invasion currency to buy stuff. Were you told to deal with them in a certain way, or what instructions were you given?
To deal with the French?
Yeah.
No, we were liberating them. We were, from my point of view anyway, the title we were given was British Liberation Army, DLA. Yeah. And that, to me, was inspiring. We were liberating France. We weren't occupying it. And the same with Belgium and Holland. When we got to Luxembourg, at the time we got to Germany, it changed the name to the British Army of the Rhine, which was an occupation army. The whole atmosphere changed.
Occupation is
no longer with friends, we were with enemies.
Yeah. But but you weren't before, when you had the briefing for Overlord, you weren't given any instructions about don't talk to the French or don't trust the French, because as I say, some American units were specifically told not to have any encounters with the French at all, just to get on with your job and ignore them. You weren't given any such instructions?
No. We were told they were friends, but obviously
it seems to be more British than the American, to just accept them. And did you give them any of your rations? Did you trade? Did you give them cigarettes in exchange for cheese, or?
No, I bought.
You bought it.
I bought eggs and milk. I came across Camembert's factory, and that had cheese, lots and lots of cheese. They've been abandoned, there's nobody running it. I thought, well, I've got some cheese at last. When I opened the first one, there was such a smell, I had to dig a hole and bury the lot. I've never touched Camembert since.
There is for those watching, there is actually a village in France called Camembert, and officially Camembert comes from Camembert. So if you go down to Falaise Gap, Camembert is just a couple of miles away from Bermoutier, where the Tiger Tank is, and there's a museum there to Camembert cheese today. But it is, like Cheddar is a place in England, in Cheddar Gorge, there is an actual town called Camembert, but you can make Camembert. I'm just giving this information for those watching. But so Ben, is there anything you want to cover? Because you've researched Mervyn's stories. What have you found interesting about Mervyn's experience as well that you can add as well? Not that I'm saying Mervyn can't do it himself, but just bring you in.
Yeah, one poignant part that Mervyn's touched on for his unit, it got off to quite a bad start, really. As he said, the advanced recce unit going out, they embark 6th. They sail out on the night of the 7th, and as they approach probably northwest of Le Havre, the 9th Schnellboat flotilla have come out, and they've managed to intercept this convoy heading towards Gold Beach. They've got in, they've quickly been able to torpedo LCI 105 and LCT 875. Motor Launch 903 has been able to then intercept and chase off the boats that have been able to get in and torpedo them. But sadly, especially for LCI 105, it takes a direct hit, and one of the rooms that's hit contains around 14 officers. And these 14 officers were all from the Royal Army Ordnance Corps. And sadly, they would be killed and go down with the LCI. And what stood out for me when I was looking and researching this was that for myself, I'd never come across such in one incident, that loss of life for so many officers in one go. And just to reiterate that, you had 2 lieutenants, 4 corporals, 5 majors and 3 lieutenant colonels, all in one go, that would go down on the night of the 7th and 8th of June and not land. And no doubt, logistically, then once word gets back that these senior officers have all been lost at sea, the knock-on effect then for the further waves that would come in, and Mervyn himself that would go in, these officers that had been planning for months, they've been reading these briefing documents, they knew exactly where they needed to go when ashore. All of a sudden they're killed before they even land, and then logistically the problems that would then cause for further waves, and then other officers then having to step up to get these plans functioning, and hence Mervyn coming in on a second advance recce to then go and set up the vehicle park.
Because you wonder with the loss of those officers, how much of their instructions for Normandy actually been passed on to everybody because of security. So it explains why Mervyn doesn't quite know who the guy beside him and exactly what they were supposed to be doing and where they were supposed to be going. Because if every single person involved down to private knew the entire plans, of course it wouldn't have worked. The secrecy would have been lost. So it does explain in this situation how you lose a considerable number of chiefs in one go. The Indians then have no idea what they're doing. And for those watching, it also reminds us that the German Navy was still around in the summer of 1944, not perhaps in the numbers they had been earlier in the war, and the Battle of Atlantic had certainly been turned in our favor. But to think that we were still suffering losses is important. The ships that were going back and forth, they were losing LCIs and LSTs throughout June and July and into August. In fact, the biggest disaster was in December when the troop ship lost off Cherbourg, the Leopoldville. So there are still problems with mines and ships, and enemy shipping. So Mervyn, let's get back to the Normandy story again. And we had one question in advance from Ramsey Green, who's one of the viewers of my channel, and he said, "Can you tell us about the rations you were given before D-Day and what you ate in Normandy?" Ramsey has basically been studying British Army rations for the last few years. He wonders whether you remember particularly the 24-hour ration pack and also the self-heating soups. Did you have any dealings with either of those commodities, Mervyn?
Well, I thought the self-heating vegetable soup was marvellous idea. You just open the tin and it heated in a few seconds. But I thought it would take off after the war, but it never did.
Yeah,
somebody trying to find some for me now.
Sorry, for those watching, it was like a candle that went inside the tin. When you pulled the ring, it kind of burned this like fuel block in the middle, but half the tin was the fuel block. But yeah, self-heating soup. But I think Ramsey, the watching, will be very pleased because he's never really spoken to anybody who actually ever used the self-heating soup. So I think you'll make his day that you actually had it. Do you happen to remember what flavor you had? Because it came in oxtail, tomato, and I think vegetable. Do you happen to remember what flavor self-heating soup you had?
Vegetable soup.
Probably all the similar, wasn't it? But and the 24-hour ration packs. Do you remember those as well in your mess tins, or did you have them, or were you eating compo?
we had a little packet of porridge, which
Right.
we could add water or milk and heat it in our mess tins on our own little heaters that gave little stoves, little things like this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Folded flat, and opened up, and you put your mess tin on top. And I think that was about all we had. We had a water for purifying, a pill for purifying water, because we expected the Germans to poison tanks and reservoirs and wherever they could, streams.
Mm-hmm.
We were told they did, but because we didn't try them. But that was our emergency rations, and that we expected to live on for about 48, 72 hours until a field kitchen could be established.
Mm.
After that, it was obviously wider food.
And given that we're 76 years ago today was the beginning of the 4-day storm that hit Normandy and famously nearly destroyed the American Mulberry A harbor at Omaha Beach. Do you remember, Mervyn, in the days that followed the storm, supplies getting less? Were you still getting supplies in, or was there a period where you weren't being supplied as much? Because the accounts of Normandy say that there was a real struggle getting stuff ashore those few days.
Most of our vehicles were coming in on the beach.
Right.
I never saw them, obviously, but there were two of them actually set up. One for the Americans and one for the British. The American one was destroyed in the storm. It broke away from its moorings as a part of it. So the Americans couldn't use it. They had the trouble of managing without it. But our vehicles, a lot of the vehicles came in from the big ships, which they were able to keep offshore and still land their vehicles like a bridge, a giant bridge. They brought them in. Those didn't slow our deliveries down at all.
But that's interesting to know.
Still coming on the beach even while Margaret was there.
Wow, because I think, you know, it's a testament to the efficiency of the British Army that we aren't struggling too much. If you're saying you don't remember the supplies kind of running dry and vehicles not coming in, it's a testament to the fact that we have not put all our eggs in the one basket with mulberries. We have mulberries and we have LSTTs. We land on the beaches. We can use Courcelles. We can use the other beaches. So if supplies are continually coming in, it's a real testament to how efficient our system was. So Normandy again, Mervyn, what other vivid memories? You know, I can't imagine being able to remember back 76 years. I can't remember what I had for breakfast last week, but what vivid memories do you still have 76 years on from Normandy, or indeed the European theatre anyway? Are there things that will always be forefront in your mind?
It's hard really to say. To me, it was routine, and the routine that had to be kept up to strength. There was an officer, my officer was one of those that were lost on the wrecking company, and myself in the technical department, as it was called. So that left me on my own. I had to do his job as well as my own. And as far as I was concerned, that job came first. I did go off to the farms in the evening and talk to French people in order to practice French, but that was only when I could. My first job for myself was to be as efficient as possible. It's only when I had nothing to do that I took time off. I was left more or less to myself to do my own thing. The vehicles came in all times of day and night, mostly early morning, and because they were crossing the channel from early morning. And it was just work, clerical work mostly, and then driving the vehicles into their positions so they could be easily removed and identified. And that came first with everything.
And tell me, Mervyn, people like Ben and myself, we spend our times talking about the operations in Normandy and Epsom and Bluecoat and Goodwood and the various pushes and advances. When you think back of being there in June and July, how aware were you on any day of exactly what was happening to the British Army generally? Did you hear rumours? Were you aware of the big advance, or were you just doing your job and thinking about your small part? I'd like to know what news you were getting on a daily basis.
Well, you did know, I've forgotten how, but you did know, I did know anyway, what the army was doing, how far it had got, and why it couldn't go any further, and things like that. The Germans were blocking us, obviously stopping us getting to Rouen or Caen.
Oh, yeah.
No, I was aware. I can't think how we knew. I think we had briefings. But I was interested anyway as to what was going on and how far we got and what's happening. And of course, when they broke through, that was a good thing. Our job, or to say Montgomery's job, the British Army, was just to hold the Germans down and take most of their armour, attract most of their armour, so the Americans made a big sweep round, but they did.
Yes, an overlooked point, I think, that...
On that right flank. The Americans made a lot of how marvellous they were and how quickly they moved, but only did so because the British Army was holding the main part of the German army.
Well, and for those watching, this is a pertinent moment to mention that for all the glamour, perhaps is the wrong word, but Americans sweeping up the Cherbourg and sweeping down Patton's Third Army towards Brittany, for every German tank in the American sector in July, there were 7 or 8 in the British sector. That, as Mervyn so correctly said, and Ben could be nodding as well, the British are doing this perhaps duller job, but is sitting in the Caen area and just holding off and gradually destroying the German army that's continuing trying to push us back. And the German army is bashing itself to bits against our force building up out of Caen. So the idea the British was slow is not really the case. We were doing what we had to do, as were the Canadians, to enable the advance to occur generally. That's the way I look at it. So yeah, so the other thing we thought we'd mention with those watching this is the news this week, of course, of the passing of Dame Vera Lynn at 103 years old, and I think we should touch on that because labelled the forces sweetheart. What were your when did you first hear about Vera Lynn back in the war? Can you remember when you first heard one of her songs, and what did it mean to you, and what did her passing mean to you this week?
I was in college when I think I first heard her. I wasn't a fan of pop music, which this was, but at the same time, the actual songs themselves, the music, as well as the lyrics, were so evocative of what was the mood of the time. It provided the mood and reacted to it. They were songs with the experience of feelings. And the lyrics also are very meaningful for me and for everyone I knew. I remember my teacher scorning her efforts. But to us, to the older fellows, I was only 17 then at college when I was joining the army and I was 18. But to those who were older, she was one of them. To me, she was an old woman already. She was 7 years older than me. Big difference when you're 17, 18
Yeah.
years old. But we looked at her as a sort of an older sister. She was the girl next door, in fact. She represented the ordinary people, which we were.
That's how I feel with that footage with us being on the news this week of her out in Burma. She just looks very relaxed and normal around the Tommies out there. She doesn't appear to be putting on any airs and graces of I'm the star, here I am, here's my autograph. She's just there with them. And the fact she finally got her Burma star, didn't she, about 20 years ago? She didn't get a Burma star at the time. And a campaign, it was about 20 years ago, I think she finally got her Burma star for her recognition of the fact she was not absolutely in the front line, but she wasn't far away. And she reminds me of Bob Hope in American, who seemed to actually always be going out there and seeing the troops. And yeah, her passing is the end of an era. And for those watching, we were just checking before we went on live. White Cliffs of Dover was actually written by a New Yorker, which is intriguing. I wonder whether that New York song had ever seen the White Cliffs of Dover. You'll be pleased to know We'll Meet Again was written by 2 British songwriters, but the White Cliffs of Dover was written by an American. So I'm going to have to look into that a little bit more and find out the story behind that. But yeah, what did you, Ben? You're younger than me. What does Vera Lynn mean to you as well?
she's always been there for the veterans, and that her music has stood the test of time. And even recent times, we've drawn on her music, listened to those words, even with the Queen in her speech 2 months ago, using lyrics as well. So her legacy will live on, no doubt, for many, many more years.
No, absolutely. It's she had the right material, and she encapsulated what we needed then. And seems to have kept kind of relevant.
What Churchill did intellectually, she did emotionally. She read people, made them feel worthwhile, and what they were doing was worthwhile. I think it was a marvellous thing. She was the only one of all the various entertainers that were any such that really held the court. She really held us all.
Yeah, and when you think back at the war on a personal level, so we talked about Vera Lynn's music. When you were very young, you're painfully young when you're in Normandy. 18, 19 is no age at all. But what kept you going on a day-to-day basis? Was it letters from home? Was it good food? Was it hope of a better future? What made you do your job well every day? What was your process for getting it done?
It was making progress, military progress.
Right.
That was my interest. My interest throughout. We had education officers who gave lectures from time to time, called us together and gave lectures, explained what was going on with maps and so on. But they talked as little, but to my mind, they kept talking about the other side and Jerry and all sorts of canny names like that. To me, they were the Hun. The evil creatures in front of us. They didn't instill any hate, which I think was needed. So after they finished, I called my own group. I got more people attending than the officers did. I got my own map out with strings on it on the pins, showing where the frontiers and the east as well as the west. But mostly it was the east that was moving forward. A bit back forward again, the Russians. And I was trying to explain what was happening. It was the war itself that drove me. The food, I wasn't very interested in food. I didn't eat much. I was vegetarian. I had potatoes and I had a bit of greens when necessary. And I don't like tea. I never did like tea, so I didn't drink much of that. I had milk. The meals have been interesting, still do. Now I'm living on my own, I hardly have anything. I could do with that tin that opens the heat of itself and take me doing it.
So Mervyn, you said about the officers coming around giving you sort of situational briefings. How aware were you of the politics? Were you aware of the true evil of the Nazis at this point, or was that to be discovered later on?
When I was about 12, which was in the mid-30s, I remember my father and my uncle always having discussions with his brother-in-law. One was left, one was more conservative. And we had many discussions, and I used to listen to them, and I sided with the left, but I even went further left. But no, I was fully aware that the war began, as far as I was concerned, back in 1935, with the 36, with the Spanish Civil War. So-called. With the Germans and the Italians were on one side, and the British were blockading the coast of Spain to make sure that nobody, neither side, got goods. Because the Spanish didn't need to get it from goods, they got it by sea, they got it by land. It was only the Republicans that couldn't get it. No, I was interested then from war and what was going on in Germany. We knew that they were killing people who were imperfect, as they saw them, invalids, and people that weren't 100% fit. They put to death. The whole industry was going up, apart from the attacks on Jews and Gypsies and anyone else, Poles who not just attacks, but elimination of them, killing them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that puts you in a very rare position, Mervyn, because we had politicians who were not really aware of what was going on in the late 30s. If you were 13, 14 in the mid 30s, for you to be aware at that point of just exactly what we were going to have to fight against, I say we, I wasn't there, but what the Allies had to fight against was putting you in a very very unusual position, because Ben, we don't generally meet veterans who have much idea of the politics behind the war. Ben, most of them are just doing their job. That's the norm, isn't it, Ben? Is that your experience as well as mine?
Yeah, especially the younger ones that were just called up, got their papers, 17, 18-year-olds, then 19, and they were going to and end up fighting for their friends, not for the king or for country. They end up telling you that they fight for the person that was next to them, their friend.
Yeah.
So I think it's very. I'm finding it very interesting, Mervyn, that you actually knew exactly what you were fighting for, and the fact you said they were the Hun, they were the enemy, is very, very revealing. And I have no problem with you saying that. We were fighting a vicious, awful enemy, and it's, of course, 76 years have passed now. We can move on and forgive without forgetting. But so tell me, when you got to the latter part of the war, and did you ever get to see any of the camps? Did you witness any of that?
Well, I did start to. I had 3 days in hospital with an ear infection in the homes. My unit went up to Hamburg.
Right.
When I came out of hospital, I was simply joining my unit. I was sent to Berlin. I was sent to Hanover, a place called Celle. The idea was to go to Berlin to deal with Germany's poison gas shells and bombs, dispose of them. I waited in a barracks there for 2 weeks. Nobody came to pick me up, and I didn't know who it was. It turned out they didn't know where I was either, so that failed. But while I was there 2 weeks, I realised I was right next to the Bergen-Belsen camp. So I spent most of that 2 weeks. I couldn't go in the camp, wasn't where I was in. It was just, I got there just about 7 days after it was liberated. But there was so much illness there, typhus, that I wasn't allowed in. But I was near it, and I spoke to hundreds of the inmates who were fit enough to walk. They were trying to make their way Buffer to Hanover, about 40 miles, to Hanover Station. That's the railway hub of Germany. They had to get views from people from all over Germany, to their families and their friends, their hometown people. That was a harrowing time. I tried to collect. I changed my ration. I always change my. Could have started the other way around. The weekly ration was 50 cigarettes and a bar of chocolate. I changed 5 cigarettes a week as I didn't smoke. I changed those for chocolate. And at Felsen, I only used my chocolate, but I went around collecting chocolate from everyone. And I took loads of chocolate to the people who were coming out. Their eyes had shut because they hadn't seen chocolate for years. It was only, I think, a year or 2 later that I was told that chocolate was the worst thing you can give someone who hasn't eaten. They can't digest it. I don't know how many died as a result of my efforts. But I didn't realise that at the time. They were like skeletons, even those who could walk. I couldn't see how they're going to walk 40 miles. As a fit young man, I didn't like walking 40 miles as a soldier. But,
Wow.
It was very harrowing speaking to them, speaking with a mixture of English and French and hand waving.
And now with the benefit of 76 years 75 years since the end of the war, and I know this isn't the first interview, you've spoken to many people, you seem to be happy to talk about the war and your service. Why do you continue to want to talk about the war? What message do you think we younger people, Ben and me, are younger than yourself, why is it important to keep talking about World War II?
To realise what it was for, but wasn't fighting for anything. Wasn't a war of conquest. For me, it was a war against something, against evil, and I mean evil in its true sense. And I think that's the lesson we've got to learn above all else. we and our friends, our countries feel the same as us as democracies. They've got to remain strong, not only morally but also militarily, because as a bully, like Germany, he threatened everyone long before he attacked anyone. He threatened them. He knew what was coming. He knew long before 1938, before England went crawling to Hitler. We knew that they were out. I mean, he was quite outspoken. He wrote it down in my camp that he intends to occupy all of Europe. But they either like the idea or were too morally weak to deal with it. That's something to avoid today. You've got to be. Hitler would never have attacked France. He never attacked Poland if he thought he might not win. But he attacked France, Belgium, Holland, Norway, Denmark, all in one go, because he knew they were weak. And he was going to attack Britain because he knew that we were. It was only the channel that kept us free, and then the Royal Air Force, of course. But you've got to be strong. If you want to remain out of war, you've got to remain militarily strong. However it is threatening.
So I think I know the answer to the next question, but I'm assuming you would do it all again. You have no regrets of what you did. You believed it was a worthy mission. You must have some bad memories, but it was all an endeavor absolutely worth taking. So if the brown envelope came through your door tomorrow, would you do it all again?
Actually, I'm still in the army. When I left in 1946, I was put on the reserve.
Okay.
So I could be called back at any time. I'm still looking at the post every day to see whether I'm going to be called up again.
Well, I'm hoping that we don't need to rely on you again. I mean, I'm hoping that if we have to start relying on people in their 90s, it's not that I'm sure you couldn't do a job. I'm hoping we've got some younger people who could step up. I hope Ben gets the envelope first, then me, then you. That's the way it should be. Ben's still just about young enough to go and do it. So, Ben, have you got any questions you'd like to ask Mervyn? Anything that we think we haven't touched? Because you know Mervyn better than I do.
No, he's covered the accounts that we've spoken about before, really, during the Normandy campaign. I was hoping this would give yourself, Paul, a bit more of an insight, ready for your future talks that you're going to have, especially around the logistics side of the campaign. Yeah. And just a few little figures that I looked at before coming on. I've got on the 26th of July, the 21st Army Group in the front that's roughly 30 miles wide by 10 miles deep. You've got nearly 160,000 vehicles confined in that small space, and the vehicle park that Mervyn was overseeing himself, you're looking at roughly up to 1,000 vehicles being stored there, ready to go, constantly coming in through the beaches, whether it be through the Mulberry Harbour or directly onto the beaches. But these vehicle parks constantly being supplied and then ready to be distributed. And it's not just vehicles. You've got the ordnance side, and then other units. You've got the hygiene units, so the bathing units, the cleaning, washing units that are all essential to keep this effort going and to keep the men clean and healthy as well, which all form part of what the Royal Army Ordnance Corps were helping to bring in and supply these units with the vehicles. So it's a really interesting subject to cover and a very important side to it, as well as the fighting.
You know, definitely. And Mervyn, I've just thought of another question. This massive vehicle park you're in charge, well, you're part of, was the policy then to replace vehicles, or were you still trying, I mean, not to say you personally, but were the REME still looking to repair vehicles, or do you have enough strength now you can just replace it? Because the Jeep, famously, I think the Americans said had a life expectancy of about 2 days or something, and they would just get a new one out of a crate and replace it. So with the British Army, were you replacing or repairing generally?
Both. The Ordnance Corps was supplying everything.
Yeah.
Except petrol and munitions. That was done by the Royal Army Service Corps.
Yeah.
They kept bringing that in. Then you had the Royal Army, Royal Mechanical and Electrical Engineers, REME.
Yeah.
they did the repairing of the vehicle. There were various calls dealing with different things. When some of our vehicles, if they broke down, when they came back to us damaged, sometimes in exchange, then we passed it on to Remy, to their car parks, for them to work on. In fact, at one time I was sent there to try and speed up their turnaround. They were taking a long time. I did that just by keeping account of how many vehicles were coming in per day and how many were going out. And letting them know that I was doing it. And the production speeded up.
Mm. I mean, it seems to me, I don't know the details, but it seems to me running vehicles like this almost works like triage in a hospital. Someone has to look at the big picture and say, is it worth repairing these vehicles, or should we replace? Someone's coordinating this huge effort between Royal Army Service Corps, Royal Army Ordnance Corps, and REME to keep everything pushing in the same direction with all these. I mean, it's an operation with many moving parts, literally and figuratively, and it must have been a mammoth task just to organize that. And your figures there about 100, was it 106,000 vehicles you say? 160,000.
Yeah, just under 160,000 in that 21st Army Group area.
That's incredible. I mean, and that's then all the spare parts, all the head gaskets and replacement points, and the spare tires, the spare
Other parts of the depot, and then of course later other depots arrived. 16 AOC arrived, and they took over past the growing army. They took over other sections. My company, my AOC, was largely supplying 30 Corps, which was from the beginning. That's 30 Corps. At one time, the vehicle company was spread over the German motorway, Autobahn, and it closed the Autobahn because of so many vehicles. In the end, they had to note it with another one and start reducing them. But as well as repairing vehicles as it went along, to keep them flowing, basically waiting for new ones to come. The whole job was to beat the Germans as quickly as possible. That's how I saw it. I think that's we did.
So on a purely, trivial matter, all these different types of vehicles you were dealing with, Mervyn, did you have a favorite? Was it you mentioned the Bedford? Was the Bedford the better one, or did you like Austin's? Was there something was there a vehicle you hated? Was there one that you went, oh, not that one again? Because some of them were harder to drive than others, weren't they? What were your favorites and your least favorites?
Well, it was the vehicle parts that I learned to drive.
Right.
For a time, as I said, I was at Remy for a couple of weeks to try and speed their production up. And had nothing to do but add up these figures, how many came in and came out. So I took a vehicle, a staff car, Daimler, I think it was.
Oh, nice.
Or a Hillman. Just had a broken lamp. I drove that around the countryside and learned to drive. One time I was asked if I'd like to join in, somebody was ill or something on a convoy, but I'd like to take over a lorry, a 3-ton Bedford lorry, which I've never driven. So I said yes, gamely. And I got in, it was pouring with rain, it was in Belgium. It was going down the Charleroi. I didn't know where they were going. I joined them at the last minute as a replacement. And I just, near the end of the convoy, followed along, and suddenly they turned left, and I didn't. I went onto the pavement, my lorry skidded. I found out afterwards I had a DAP, a DWA vehicle in the back, which wasn't fixed in properly. I didn't know that as I took it over. Normally the drivers check it, but I didn't because I was a replacement. And it swung and made the vehicle swing onto the pavement between the shops in the high street, between the shops and the lamppost. But I managed to control it until I could bring it to a halt. The time I got out of being shaken, the convoy disappeared. I had no idea where they'd gone or where they were going. So all I could do was turn around and limp back to camp. But that was my first experience of a 3-ton Bedford. That was the most common vehicle, I think. The fire vehicles were carrying goods and personnel.
And after the war, did you have to learn to drive officially, or did they just hand you a civilian driving license automatically? Knowing the British, they probably made you go and do a test, did they?
I haven't got one yet.
You haven't got one yet? Okay.
I've been driving for 70 years, because I haven't got a driving test. No, the last few days in the army, I went to wherever it was, the police station or town hall, I've forgotten. Asked for a driving license, and they said, well, you're sitting in uniform, get it free in the army. So I went back to the unit I was in. It wasn't my own unit, I was waiting to be discharged. And the officer said, it was raining, as it does. Said, take this chap down in a 3-ton and see what he can do. So I got in the lorry. The camp was circular as a saucer. I just held the driving wheel, solid as out, didn't move it. Went right round the camp like that. He came back to down and he said, "Oh, are you all right?" The sergeant said, "Yes." And that was it. I've got a driving license. I've never had one since. I've just renewed it since. I've never taken the test. But I'm a better driver than my son and other younger people.
And I think my final question, unless either of you have anything to say, is that day you finally said goodbye to your khaki battle dress and you had your D-mob suit on and you were out of the British Army. What was the first thing you did when you left that camp and you're now a civilian again? What was that first thing you did?
You asked me something I don't remember. I remember going home.
You remember going home?
Yeah, because I didn't know anyone else who was there at the time. We were all strangers coming from various units to the mob camp. I think that was in the RAOC somewhere, just got the RAOC. We just went home.
And what did you do with your life after the war?
Every bit of item, every equipment, including clothing from us. That's why I haven't got a polish cap anymore.
Right.
Even that they thought, what they did with that, I don't know.
It should be someone else probably. So what did you do with it after the war? Just briefly, how have you spent the last 75 years since the war?
It's a long time.
Just a summary. Obviously you had a family.
I had very great difficulty in getting a job. I should have gone back to studies, which was interrupted. But being stubborn, I didn't want to be a burden on my parents, although they wanted me to go to a teaching course,
Right.
Things subsidised by the government. I looked for a job. I wrote to many companies. Most of them said, who bothered to apply, said I was too old. I was 21 then. So, very disheartening. But I found a job in the end, and I then came to a job of journalism. I did the paper at one time, I did sales. Because the company I started with my brother, who manufactured the first fabric garment with simulation in this country.
Right.
And in France then, just beginning in France. And I sold those all over the world. Soviet Union and Khrushchev, I was invited there.
Wow.
And that was a fascinating thing. I went there very pro-Soviet, came back very enlightened when I saw the people in there, what they had to put up with. I sold it even to Yemen, which is now part of the south coast of Arabia. It was very hot there. I wondered what they wanted further fabric coast for. But they sold it to Soviet sailors and other sailors who were called in at the port of Aden. In America, that was the only place I got caught. But mostly, general rules that we got paid in advance, letter of credit. So the bank held the money till the goods were delivered and then they could hand the money over. So that was safe that way. Once I relaxed with America because the customer had a heart attack in England, he was in hospital. And he said, I'll pay you as soon as I get back. So I said, all right. We sent, I think, £4,000 worth of goods to America. on that occasion, and of course I never got paid. He offered to pay half later on. There were no good to us after the season. So we had to take it in the end. And then this was a billionaire. He'd been checked out for the British cafe there. He really was a very rich man. But he had a humorous thing. I went over there once, and he invited me out to dinner to a very expensive restaurant. Well, I am not interested in food, and I didn't have very much. But he guzzled it away. And at the end of the meal, he said, well, I've got to go now. I'll see you tomorrow at the office. Walked out, left me to pay the bill. And I had very little. He had a lot. He invited me to go to the restaurant. And this was the chap in later quarters.
I think you're admitting to your socialist nature there, like myself. So I think we'll draw this to an end soon. Have you got any other further kind of pearls of wisdom that you would like to tell some of the younger people watching this? You've lived a long life. You're still living a life. What advice would you give younger people?
I do speak to schools a lot, 14 to 18. And I was told what life was like in the army. The one thing I do say always, just don't remember the dead from Remembrance Day. Remember why they died. And that's the important thing. That's how I see it.
Definitely. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Kersh. It's been extraordinary. And thank you, Ben, for setting this up. I think we'll let you get back to your afternoon. It's been extraordinary. So thank you very much. And for those watching, the opportunity to listen to the words of a Normandy veteran are very rare these days. So thank you for paying attention to what we've been saying. And I think we'll draw it to an end. Any closing remarks, Ben?
No,
thank you for setting it up.
No, thank you for allowing us on again.
Well, thank you. I will end it there. So for those watching, don't forget to click subscribe to watch more World War II TV productions. We've got some things coming up next week. I'm going to announce them fairly soon. We've got an interview with Adam Makos, the author, on Tuesday. I'm looking at doing some other live streams from the battlefields, but keep following me on Twitter and YouTube, and you'll get the information. So this is Paul Woodadge saying thank you for watching, and thank you, Ben, thank you, Mervyn, and we'll see you again sometime.
Thank you.